stream is live.
Hello.
Oh, I see your Twitch here. I will send a message.
Oh, Instagram is working. Yay.
Yay. Hello.
Comments do come in. Nice.
Wonderful. Okay, great. Well, awesome. I'm so excited that we are doing this. Thank you to everyone that is slowly pouring in. I actually don't know how many folks we have or will have. Maybe it's just us talking into the vacuum. That's fine.
It would be
Grateful-
appropriate with the theme.
Yeah, totally.
It says one, and I think that's me.
I think that is you. But also, I don't know if we're getting views on the other things. We are live on Instagram. Oh, Tina Marie is joined us on Instagram.
Hi, Tina Marie.
Great. Well, wonderful. It is so wonderful to be seen, to be heard, and to be here with these lovely people. My name is Jorge Palacios. I am sometimes a Twitch streamer. Recently, only whenever there is a papal document to speak about. And here to speak and have some hopefully good conversation. I'm joined by Brenna Davis and Alexandra Bejarano. Yeah. Do you all want to introduce yourselves?
Sure. I'm Brenna. I'm friends and I work with Jorge at the Ignatian Solidarity Network, though this stream is not endorsed by ISN, nor does it present any official views of the organization. Yeah, and I do environmental work, so I was really interested in reading this document, if the Pope was going to weigh in at all about the environmental impacts of AI, and taking that into consideration in addition to all of the other topics that he covers.
Awesome. Thank you, Brenna.
Hi, I'm Alexa. I am also a friend of Jorge's. I am a postdoctoral researcher at a university, working in human-robot interaction. My work focuses on understanding how people interact and understand robots in particular, although recently I've been more generally on AI technologies, primarily focusing also on robot and AI ethics and education. Which a big part of why I was interested in looking through some of this document. I did not do my full homework and read the whole thing, but very relevant to some of the discussions I've been having in my own work and some of the projects I've been doing.
Awesome. Thank you, Alexandra. Can I just call you Alexa? Is that cool?
Yeah, I don't know. I am conflicted about whether to use my full name because it's is this professional? I don't know. Alexa's fine.
If anything, you should know I am very unprofessional. So no, but I'm so grateful that you two took the time to be here and to have this conversation. I mean, Brenna, you and I talk all the time about stuff related to what the Pope is talking about and how these issues tie into our Catholic social teaching, and that is what we do, right? Brenna and I both work for the Ignatian Solidarity Network, although this stream is not endorsed, nor is it being endorsed, nor what's the opposite of an endorsement? Condemned.
Unendorsed.
Yeah,
yeah, sure.
Neither endorsed nor condemned by ISN. Yeah, I mean, we spent a lot of time thinking about these things, but the issue of as Pope Leo calls it, right? Artificial intelligence and emerging digital technologies. This is such an interesting conflux of how do we apply these ideas of human dignity directly to the world as we see it. And I think, Alexa, you and I have had so many conversations over our time knowing each other about these things. So I'm excited to, bridge some of these worlds and yeah, think through these things in a way that feels significant. So, anyways, oh, we got more chats. The Instagram chats are great. Brody, good to see you. One of the one of the folks that was at the most recent Arupe Leadership Summit. Wow, this is great. Okay, well, before we get officially started talking about this document, I need to acknowledge that Mexico just won the first game of the World Cup. We are up 2-0. South Africa with 2 red cards, Mexico with 1. Honestly, like a pretty physical game for what's supposed to be a non-contact sport. But what else to be expected? The first goal of the World Cup was scored by a CONCACAF player, which is huge. That's the first time that's ever happened. Brenna, you were looking at me with such intensity.
Yeah, CONCACAF. That's amazing. I've never would have thought that would have happened, and I definitely know what that is.
I'm not gonna elaborate because that's
I'll
almost
ask
funnier
later. Yeah.
This turns into a soccer stream, actually.
You know, I was considering making that joke. I feel like I look like a soccer podcaster right now.
Yeah, you do.
You gotta show off the jersey a little more. There you go.
My home fan jersey from 2024. That is technically what it's called because it doesn't have any of the cool prints.
Mm-hmm.
And this stream is endorsed by Adidas.
Yes, Adidas is paying us to talk about Pope Leo's encyclical. No, I mean, yeah. I guess to get us started, is there anything that's front of mind for us as we start this conversation? I mean, I have some thoughts, but also I feel like Brenna, you have some thoughts.
I feel like Alexa has thoughts too. You know,
Alexa also has thoughts.
I think one of the things I really appreciated with this is how comprehensive the like AI ethics was covered. Like as I was reading through it, I was like, oh, he's like going full coverage of the different dimensions that are like always a part of these discussions, at least in the academic world for sure.
Yeah, I mean, say more. Like that's the thing that I probably know the least about is like what is happening in the like AI ethics world, right? Like what are computer science, what are AI researchers, saying, and how does that sort of connect with what Pope Leo said in his document? I mean, yeah.
Oh god. I mean, like I said, it was pretty comprehensive. Like he covered some major topics, which one of them was like social responsibility, like who does it lie on, whether it's like the developers, the user. And I really appreciated he was like, it's everyone from the start of it being developed to the end user. I'm hearing myself. There we go. Can you still hear me okay? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
I left my laptop. I don't have it here, so I'm doing this on my phone, and it seems to be having some issues. So you all keep going, and I'll jump in when the stream catches up.
Oh, I think it caught up.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Yeah. No, that's great context to have. Because I sometimes when I read a document like this and the Pope is speaking about, I mean, specifically this issue, so much of my understanding is, I mean, conversations I have as like a layperson, right? Both in terms of I'm not a priest, but also I don't work in AI research. And we will get Brenna back soon. So many of the conversations I have, I feel like I'm not having to the depth that like actual AI researchers and people that think about these things on a daily basis are having, right? A lot of it is like, well, I don't like AI because, the water usage and, how are, I feel like I don't always have the like technicality of language to really approach it. So and so when I read something like this, I'm like, okay, how much of this is like the Pope approaching with that level of technicality? So it's good to know that like this feels comprehensive even to like someone doing that like level of research.
Yeah, I mean, when you asked me like tell us about what is happening in the academic world, I wasn't sure what more to add as like in regard to the type of dimensions, because he does cover it. He talks about the impacts this type of technologies have on humans, the impacts it has on the environment, the different sets of risks that come with like the different, I guess, level of people involved, you know? And I really appreciated how detailed it was to that extent. I also like really like the connections to then like the broader implications of that. Like one of the things my research has recently been focusing on is like the education aspect. How do we teach like people that, like you said, that are like a lay person about these types of things in a way that they'll understand it and have like a critical view of it. um, I don't know where I was going that I just started rambling, but
No, that's a great point. And I think to some extent there is like an understanding that like the Pope, when he wrote this document, and also like in full transparency's sake, like the Pope did not write all of this document by himself. Like this is not uh this is so funny. When I was a music major in a different lifetime, um we have to learn about like the history of European music, and one of the things that we have to talk about is like the mass and the chant and like the things that pop up there, because it's like pretty foundational to like the early part of like European music, and it's like what we have as far as like text to like look back on. And my professor that was teaching that class was like, oh yeah, when we talk about this, we talk about like, when I learned this, I learned that a little bird came down from heaven and sang all of these uh melodies into the ear of Pope Gregory, and Pope Gregory wrote them down, and that is what we refer to as Gregorian chant. And like obviously that's not true, right? Like there was a lot of musicians who worked together, and like it was kind of just canonized. It was put together, codified under Pope Gregory, but we still sort of refer to it as Gregorian chant, because it happened during his time. um and that's kind of what this document is, right? Like Pope Leo signed it, he put a stamp on it. Clearly he probably had a pretty decent hand in writing it, but like he wrote this with experts in the fields of AI. He wrote this with like theological experts and lots of people, right? And so it makes sense that this comes together in the way it did.
yeah,
Yeah.
I think that's at least the chapter that I did fully read. Chapter 3 felt pretty like cohesive and like clear of like the different trade-offs. For a second when I was reading this, I was like, damn, okay, I'll invite the Pope to be a co-author on some papers I'm working on.
How crazy is it too that like now in your research you can cite the Pope?
And that's what I told my boss too. So like some of the work I've been doing focuses on like compassion and education, and part of that is like how do robots maybe simulate that compassion. And there's a lot of quotable things in this regarding compassion, especially the later parts when it gets to more on like the concept of love in this like type of development. So yes,
Yeah.
definitely can cite the Pope on like why human values are important in the ethical development of technology.
That's that's so fascinating. And we can also get into, I mean, I think what's fascinating about this particular document has been the like public reception of it. Like I feel I'm gonna let Brenna back into the conversation. Uh One of the things that's so fascinating to me is like I feel like when Laudato Si came out, it was like something that Catholics that were sort of tuned in to this sort of thing knew about. But also like I was a student, I was like a theology minor, and so I knew about it. I was also like in campus ministry as a student at like a Catholic university when it came out. So I feel like I had a good sense that it was happening, and I sort of knew that it was about the environment. But even at the time, as like a 19 or 20-year-old, like it really didn't hit me what Laudato Si was until I had to read it for a class myself, like a year or two later. But I feel like in the news and on social media, so many people were like, "Oh, the Pope wrote an encyclical," and I think because people aren't necessarily reading 245 chapters of pretty dense language, all things considered, like what they necessarily get out of it is not always the most cognizant of what the document is. But like it's still fascinating that like so many people were like, "Oh, the Pope wrote a thing about AI. Maybe I can get out of using AI at my desk job," right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's memes, and we can share them. We can talk about the memes later. Um, I think the last thing I want to say is just context before the actual document is like, it was so interesting that the CEO of, was it Anthropic? The CEO of like a major AI, like a major tech organization that is producing one of the large AI projects, was at the Vatican when Pope Leo presented this encyclical.
Didn't know that.
It, and it was, I mean, I can look up who it was, and I think it was the CEO of Anthropic, and he like also spoke at the same event and was like, "We are happy to have consulted with Pope Leo about this document, and also like, yeah, there is clearly a need for world leaders and governments to sort of step up in helping like do some of the work of legislating and essentially safeguarding human dignity as it comes to conversations around this technology."
Yeah, it was Anthropic. I'm glad I didn't know that that was the case, which I'm kind of glad to hear, because one of the things when this came out, it was like, okay, this is going to be something that a lot more people will read regarding AI versus like the academic research papers that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was talking to my boss about this, we were wondering like how impactful will this actually end up being on those at the top of like some of this development.
Yeah. I do feel like just in like Catholic social thought has been out front in a lot of times throughout history. And so, the Pope Leo took his name after the Pope who wrote the first kind of modern Catholic social teaching on like labor rights. And so I do think that it's really heartening. I've heard people mentioning it in unexpected places on like podcasts that have nothing to do with religion. And yeah, I do find that heartening. And, in one of those podcasts, I think it's just like a political podcast, they were saying like there's just such a desire for kind of a moral voice in the world at this time when everything can feel so relative. And so yeah, I think like the Catholic Church we have like our criticisms. It is not perfect, but it is pretty cool to see that it seems like a lot of people, whether they're religious or not, are interested in what the Pope has to say and are interested in kind of regulations and some sort of measured stance or measured response when it seems like every ad you see, every technological program that I have now has an AI integration. I just heard on the news McDonald's is now has like an AI ordering system, which like I don't even understand because it's like just I don't know, like you just order your food, like it's beyond. It would like I don't know if it would make a menu for you. I don't know if you all heard about this. Anyway, I'm talking about the Pope's moral voice, and I find that encouraging.
I had no idea about this AI ordering situation. That seems absolutely wild to me.
Please look it up. I heard it in the car the other day, and I was like, "What are we doing?"
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of the thing, right? Like it feels like not only is this technology emerging, but it feels like it's sort of being integrated in ways that don't even necessarily feel uh, meaningful. Um, but all right, let's dig into the meat of this document, I think, or let's dig into what's a less
The
violent way of
tofu.
putting the tofu of this document.
Yeah.
the real, yeah, the real starch of this document. I
Mhm.
mean, how beautiful of an introduction, right? Like Pope Leo, again, I know that he was not the only one who wrote this, but I think it's fair to say that when we refer to Pope Leo as the author of this document, we mean like the team that worked together to publish this. How beautiful of an introduction. Like just the first like sentence or two or three in at the very beginning of paragraph 1. Humanity, created by God in all its grandeur, is today facing a pivotal choice: either to construct a new Tower of Babel or to build the city in which God and humanity will dwell together. Like, I think that that's probably the most shocking thing about this document is like it has this deep technical understanding of Catholic social teaching. It addresses AI and the ethical concerns around AI in some pretty, thoughtful ways, but the poetry that just emanates, right? He's painting such a wonderful picture. Um and like that's that theme of like, are we constructing the Tower of Babel or are we building the city in which God and humanity will dwell together, as a framing device for like the choice that humanity has. And it really does harken back to that first document that Pope Leo the 13th, the previous Pope Leo, wrote, like in Rerum Novarum, which translates to of new things, right? Like that is the meaning of the name of that document, Pope Leo the 13th. And this, I mean, he goes into that a little bit in the introduction and then a little bit more in the beginning of chapter 1. This like deep understanding that like this was the second industrial revolution. Times really were changing in Europe and across the world. And what Pope Leo was responding to at that time is the emerging technologies that were changing the way in which people were laboring and the conditions under which they were laboring. And he saw two sort of paths forward and was maybe offering a third path, right? Like either we go down this path where humanity and is sort of uh, restricted, and the human dignity of every individual is made to be destroyed essentially by the conditions of this emerging technology of the time and the conditions of the time and who held the power. Or we build a world in which like the rights of workers are upheld and people are encouraged to unionize and to work together to create better conditions for all of humanity. And I don't know that we did that perfectly, but it was like a good moral stance that like after that we get, in a lot of union victories in Europe and the United States that we can point to is like in a lot of ways Catholics were significantly involved in that, like the creation of the 5-day work week is like a standard, the creation of the 40-hour work week, the respect of certain religious holidays, and that became more universalized. um yeah, the rights of people to unionize, like the existence of the National Labor Relations Board as something that was codified. Some of those things are now being restricted in interesting ways, so that's, it is what it is. But I think Pope Leo is really hearkening back to that, like we are at a pivotal place in our history where we can choose to allow things to go unregulated, or we can actively choose to make a world where these technologies continue. Like we don't want to hamper the development of technologies that could be beneficial for humanity, but we learn to use them in a way that like respects the environment, respects the human dignity of all people, and allows us to all progress forward. Uh, where relationships are at the core of how we understand each other, and AI or whatever emerging digital technology. I mean, in a decade or two, it might be something else. I think that's we talk about AI, and so we're speaking to this moment, but really it could be any number of developments. How do we encounter them in a way that like really allows us to not feel like we're being hampered by them? I don't need AI in my McDonald's ordering app. Um, if anything, I need like the people that work at McDonald's and the people ordering at McDonald's and the people outside of the McDonald's to all have access to a certain kind of um, standard of living that, and the emerging sort of cultural consciousness around these things to be so that everyone is held in a certain regard and respect and has access to certain basic understandings of what it means, what a human being needs. Um, well, I just talked for like 10 minutes straight.
It's okay. You
Yeah.
always have a good way with words, so well said.
Yeah, I really appreciated that imagery as well. I think that this idea of like the Tower of Babel, as this monolith, I thought it was also, it was just like really interesting because throughout the document, there were also just like themes of like the beauty and diversity. So like the fact that like when they were building the Tower of Babel, there was only one language and there was only one thing. So it was interesting to think about that versus this imagery of like Nehemiah rebuilding the city and how people are working in their own local communities with each other, with the richness and the diversity of the skills that they have, and that's threatened to be erased with kind of this blind adherence to AI and to, our economic system. Like we could think of that as the Tower of Babel, right? So like the reason, I'm sure, I'm no economist, but I'm sure the reason that McDonald's now has AI in their app is because investors and our whole economic system are dumping a ton of money into it. So it's like that shoe company, Allbirds, it's now an AI company, right? Because they needed money. Yeah, I don't know if you heard about it, but it's like, it's wild. So it's just like we're feeding this system. And at the end of the day, the people who are meant to benefit from the system are already in the system, right? And we don't think about like who's at the bottom of the Tower of Babel. And so I do think this is like really good imagery, just to think about who's getting left behind, because like a tower gets smaller as it goes up, so not everybody's gonna make it to the top. And so I appreciate Pope Leo like talking about like the most vulnerable and who is being sacrificed in service to this kind of pursuit of the lack of unlimitedness of being like God, of being able to access and do everything. So yeah. Alexa, I am curious how this like resonates for you with your kind of like, I have no technological understanding of AI. I really liked that in the document around the 90s, he was basically like, I'm not going to describe this too much because as soon as I write something down, it's going to be like out of date anyway. I'm just kind of curious about like how all of that imagery and metaphor landed with you as someone who's like working with this technology and really knowledgeable.
I mean, it felt pretty accurate, especially I did appreciate the acknowledgement like anything that's written now is probably out of date because things are moving fast, and I see a lot of that on the research end where like research moves a lot slower than what is being put out there, and it's hard to keep up with the new technologies while also trying to be responsible and slow about making something well done, and especially when he was talking about like the diversity of people needed to be included in this. That's a big conversation that comes in like the development of these AI systems. Like, who are the people that are in the development phase? Who or what data is this based off of? Whose data is that? Is it just of those that have access to the technologies? This also made me think of like the hit that like science funding has been taking. Like some time ago, like a lot of grants or people lost a lot of funding just for mentioning like diversity and equality in their like proposals. And so like it was very exciting to see him like, no, like you need this diversity, you need all these people involved throughout this like whole step of the process. Um,
And I also wonder, like, one of the things that I think people, it's really easy as Americans to see Pope Leo through this lens of Americanism, but I also like, I do understand that he likely is paying attention to some of the things happening here, and like exactly what you're talking about, right? The cuts that higher education has been receiving across the board, and then in addition, like science research. Like, I wonder how much of that was popping up into his mind when he was writing about some of these things. I mean, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, towards the end of the document, I was like, and I don't have my digital document, so it's hard for me to find the quotes, but there was a lot that I do think he was specifically addressing in response to the United States, and I can't find a singular quote to support that, but there were a few things that he said, just about, like, I mean, at the end of the document, not to jump too far ahead, but there's this whole reflection on truth and like what is truth, and he uses the phrase fake news in the document, right? So definitely, it felt like me a clear yeah, admonishment of kind of the dynamics that we have set up in the US political system right now.
I thankfully do have the benefit of Control F.
Right.
So I can pull up the quote, but in
Technology is good sometimes.
some occasionally.
I was saying if I've said to all of my friends, as I've been talking about AI before this document came out, I was like, if I was alive when Gutenberg made the printing press, I would have been one of those people on the streets like, this is gonna destroy us. Like, like let's no printing presses. So like I understand that I can be really skeptical, and I think I like to go a lot slower than the average bear. But I do appreciate how much of a balanced take that Pope Leo also took in this document, just in terms of like technology is not inherently bad. And that was like good for my little Luddite heart to hear, right? That it can be used. And Alexa, I appreciate all of your work. Like I think we need like good people working on our technology. But that I think also was just like a takeaway for me, because I was immediately going into this document being like, but Leo's gonna slam technology and slam data centers and like da 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 da. And it was like much more of a nuanced take, which is probably better for everyone. Nuanced takes are better.
I
Well,
mean, I would. Oh,
oh no,
I
no,
was gonna
go for it.
say.
Go.
I was gonna say. I to clarify, I am not a tech bro. I am not completely pro
Sure.
AI. And also a lot of the people that I've worked with who focus more on like the human side of things. It's often kind of funny how we're a lot more critical of these technologies the more we learn about them, and
Mm,
sometimes think that it's not necessarily the best thing to focus on its development, and sometimes those human structural things need to be addressed first. Yeah, so I think that just goes back to like I like the perspective that was posed in the document, where it was very critical of like it's not all bad, but here are like the different trade-offs we really need
mhm,
to think about.
This is where we could totally go off the rails and repeat, yeah, the same dynamics that we've repeated throughout all of human history, that sacrifice the most vulnerable. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jorge, you were gonna say something.
No, no, that's fine. I'm grateful that that was said. Well, and in relation to that, like, Alexa, you and I had a conversation before this encyclical came out where it was the week of like major graduations were happening across the United States, like a couple of weeks, probably like a month ago at this point. And there was a researcher, there was a professor at a university that responded to the, there was like two or three large um commencement speakers that spoke about like AI and were booed at
Hmm.
universities because students were fed up with the conversation around AI. And just the laissez-faire way in which so many of these folks who come in are like, you're gonna have to use AI, get used to it. And I sent you that video and you were like, oh, this is a researcher I know at this university. And I was like, that's so interesting. And yeah, it feels like every person who is in higher ed that I've talked to that is doing something related to computer science or robotics or AI, emerging digital technologies, as the Pope put it, has this like very critical sense of like, I mean, you know, in just uh the story that I want to share is just like sitting at a table having dinner with like a bunch of robotics researchers, and they were like, yeah, we shouldn't be using robots for like 90% of the applications that we are. Like, people always want a robot and we don't need robots. Like, why are we making robots doing this thing that like a human can and should be doing? And I find that so fascinating that almost the more you learn about how our technology works, the more you're like, yeah, we shouldn't be using it for that. um Maybe the exception to the rule is when there's like a lot of money to be made. um yeah,
And
I
that
mean,
and that's a big motivation for a lot of computer science students, I will say.
yeah, yeah, lots of people who now are making a lot of money thinking about the war in Iran, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah, with the technology, I mean, that was the part I actually found my quotes because I did write little notes about them. And it's in the section about war. And this is where I do think that the Pope is critiquing the United States. I don't know. I mean, maybe, and I could, maybe he wrote this last year and they were like getting it revised because everything that's happening with Iran right now is really new. But in paragraph 207, I mean, this is just something that I think is really important as we help students navigate what is real, especially like as we think about truth and AI and what can be generated so easily. He says, when people come to believe that nothing is genuinely true and that principles are hollow words, then the fuse in their hearts is lit for new eruptions of intolerance and aggression. Right. And so, in this world where an AI model can create a video of anybody doing anything. I just think that truth is so important, and that's been a big issue in our country as of late. And then in the next paragraph, he goes on to say, some leaders may consider armed conflict as an effective way of diverting attention from domestic problems and a cynical tool for managing difficulties, right? And so, I was particularly thinking about the war in Iran with that, right? Of just how we're using AI and these technological tools, and maybe that's distracting people from what they're experiencing in their own home country. And I'm sure that could apply to many places around the world, but it felt very resonant for what we're experiencing in the United States right now.
Absolutely. It's fascinating, I think, the level to which this document deals with that reality of like one of the problems that AI has, not just for workers, not just for the environment, but for everyday people who are maybe not even using AI, but are on the internet or on like have access to any sort of media, is that media might present false realities. Like the the term is uh oh man, what's the philosophical term that I'm trying to think of?
Fake news.
Fake news. I found that quote, by the way. It's 191.
Oh, good.
We're also witnessing a disconcerting loss of historical memory as first-hand accounts of the Holocaust and the two world wars are disappearing. This leads to a selective or distorted rewriting of the past in a context where fake news and the manipulation of narratives obscures the lessons that have been learned. Without a living memory of the horrors of war, political decisions risk being made on the basis of power alone without any consideration for the long-term consequences. That's that's very real, right? We're I not I'm not ontology, but
Phenomenology. No, I don't know what
no,
you're thinking of.
epistemology. Yes, yeah. We're like, this is such an epistemological conversation that Pope Leo is having with us, right? Where it literally like, how do we even begin to know what is truth in a world where like knowledge itself could be fabricated, it could be hallucinated, it could be stretched to fit an agenda in a very specific way that obscures the truth. And like the level of, I mean, I feel like this is a conversation that's happening online all the time, but we need to be teaching um how to read literature, and literature in a really broad sense, so that people have the skills to like, any media that they take in, they can properly analyze, like, not only was this made by AI or not, but like, is the thing being told to me because someone is benefiting from me believing that. And I appreciate that, like, this is part of the conversation that Pope Leo was bringing into this.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious, like, Alexa, since you are kind of working in this area, like with students, like there's a whole section about like the role of schools and the role of education. And I even Slack my colleagues sometimes and I'm like, hey, is this AI? I feel old. Tell me why it is. What did I miss? So just kind of wondering, yeah, like you're in it, but like what you're seeing, like working at a university in this area.
I mean, so I'm looking at I'm a part of this in like two different aspects. So like I'm interacting with like undergraduate students often from the College of Engineering, and I've had conversations with those specifically in the computer science department. And I often ask like, how is it learning computer science now? Because I was like, oh, back in my time when I was a student like you, I didn't have AI to write my code or anything like
Yeah.
that. And a lot of what I'm getting is like there's a mix of like from teachers. Some of them are like, absolutely no, don't use it in any way possible, even though students will likely still find ways to use it for one thing or other. But there's also this other side where some are pushing it to be used in every way possible. I've seen some students really frustrated of how much it's involved in some of their like assignments, like how part of the frustration, like I don't want to use it for my own ethical personal reasons, but I have to use it for this assignment.
Mhm.
I also have to
Yeah.
learn it because industry is pushing it and they're using it in industry, so I have to know how to use these different systems. You learn how these different technologies work because it's being pushed to to such a high extent in different contexts. And at least like part of the reason like I am more on like the ethics human side of things is from my own frustrations of like there wasn't enough discussion about the ethics, the social implications. The extent of like ethical discussion of these types of emerging technologies often was centered about like whistleblowing in a company, not so much the social implications. And we're seeing more of those discussions coming up. I'm seeing a lot more discussions about like robot ethics courses coming about, those specifically focus on the interaction portion. And like that's always been present to some extent, but I feel like more recently it's like coming up more, which is nice, but it's still developing. From the like K through 12 like education aspect, because some of my work has focused on like how do we teach young children about these types of things. Um, I mean, there's no clear way of how this is being taught. And in talking with current teachers and other educators, like in science museums and such, it's sometimes hard for them to have these conversations just because there is not the like regulation aspects set already. It's not part of the curriculum that they are given to teach. So even though students might be exposed to AI or robots in other ways, or even in the classroom in some ways, teachers often, or even schools themselves, don't have the tools to like have students think critically about these types of things, or like even have the own expertise of them of their own to teach about them in some way or other. I think I lost track of what your question was, but
Yeah, just kind of like what you're seeing on the ground and like what you're saying kind of reflects in paragraph 145 it talks all about like the challenges. Well, in that whole section, it talks about the challenges to educators, but it says like you have to support ongoing formation of teachers so they can engage positively with new technologies, helping students use them responsibly, critically, and creatively rather than passively succumbing to their influence. And that's where I feel like we kind of are right now, is like, well, it's inevitable. So like, passively succumbing to their influence. And so I think that, yeah, we have to be, as much as I'm not on the AI bandwagon, like we have to be active participants, because otherwise, just like other technologies that have come before, even as we think about like the influence of social media on young people's lives, we kind of just like passively accepted that. And now only later we're realizing, oh, maybe we should have put some guardrails around this. So, yeah.
And it's definitely a lot harder with like AI systems just because of how fast it is evolving. It's hard to determine what are the right guardrails because this thing keeps like flying away from us in other ways. And like I don't know. It feels like such a complex issue. Like even like educators are very much aware like we need to prepare students for this. But how do we do it in the appropriate way? How do we prepare those guardrails? And like to some extent it's like yes, the people that are likely to be the future developers, so like those computer science students, you definitely want them to have this like critical lens because they will be the ones thinking and how these things are developed. They're the ones providing the data, providing the different tools of how this works. But then like on the broader like scope of like general education, it's like how do you bring up these things? How do you prepare educators who this is not their field, especially?
Yeah. We should toss that into Anthropic, whatever that model is called, and just ask it. That's like the good one, right? This is how little I know. I feel like OpenAI bad because they like agreed to like basically take away all of the guardrails for like the US military, right? Like Anthropic said, hey, we should have at least these three basic things that we don't do. Like we don't just let machines blow up people and like whatever the other two were. And like OpenAI was like, no, it's cool, you can do whatever. So in my mind, OpenAI bad, Anthropic less bad. Again, these are my own personal opinions and do not reflect the opinions of any of the Adidas Corporation.
Nice callback.
I mean, yeah, I think. Well, first of all, thank you, Adidas, for sponsoring once again. Where was it? What was
Allegedly.
Allegedly. Who knows for certain where the money's coming from? Perhaps Anthropic themselves. No.
No, we are not funded by AI on this podcast. This isn't a podcast.
This isn't a podcast. Whatever. Well, exactly. Right. None of us are being paid to be here. I should clarify that. The thing that I think is fascinating is that when I've talked to people who don't know nothing about AI, definitely not experts, but when I've had conversations with other lay people, and before the encyclical came out, I was very anti-AI. And I think overall, I'm still not fully on board with the implementation. I think like we need the guardrails. We need the guardrails, and those guardrails have to come in a number of forms. They have to be cultural. Some of them probably should come from the government. But one of the things that I think is fascinating in talking about emerging digital technologies such as AI is that there are really meaningful uses for AI, right? Like one of the examples that has stuck with me because of the conversation I had with that person was the use of AI to like find cancer cells much sooner than humans would be able to. Like that's the fact that we're using AI for that is incredible. Like if we can be able to treat cancer even earlier in the human body than we have been before, like I mean, the earlier that you can treat a cancer, for almost every single type of cancer, the better likelihood that person has to survive. But that also doesn't mean that like that AI being used for that purpose also means that, you know, everyone should use Chat GPT as their personal therapist. Like, clearly there's a delineation in usage. And I think that, like, within proper guardrails, like, yeah, we would not be using um AI for some of the like frivolous things that we're doing. Going back to the McDonald's example.
Yeah, or like
Or
that Sora video app or whatever.
yeah, or yeah, exactly, right? And making deepfakes. And when the president of the United States makes an AI video of him like pooping on protesters,
Yeah.
which is again a protected action under the First Amendment of the United States. Not that I have to tell that to the president of the United States, but I guess also making an AI video is protected under the First Amendment. But you know, one of those things is definitely more valid than the other.
Well, I think this also, like, I mean, I just think about like an environmental lens of things. So I think about plastics. You know, we
Mhm.
did like a give up plastics for Lent thing one time, and we got some sassy comments on our social media about, like, well, there are people with disabilities who need straws. That's not what I'm saying, right? Like, the people who need straws should have straws, right? And so I'm kind of thinking of like plastics in hospitals, that makes sense. I know they throw away a lot of stuff, but like it needs to be sterile. So, like, great, but I don't need, you know, every single person on my street doesn't need to use plastic plates. And so even thinking about like other technologies like ArcGIS, that was it's like a mapping tool, and in back in my day when I went to college, it was so powerful that you could only go to the computer lab to use it, right? You had to use a special computer. And it was like a technical tool that like certain people needed. And so I do wonder, is there a way that we can give the technology to the people who need it for these technical, you know, these like finding cancer cells or like medical diagnoses? I know it's like hard to discern like what's the limit, but I just don't think we all need this in our pockets. And I think that this like goes into that deeper question about like when you're talking about the First Amendment, like you have the freedom to make a video of like you pooping all over protesters. Yes, you have that freedom. But I think there in like the spiritual tradition and in Ignatian spirituality, we talk about freedom in a different way, right? Like this freedom that liberates. It's not you know, I can do whatever I want whenever I want, but really about the freedom to choose an action that will bring about the most love and justice, right? And I think that that's a theme that the Pope keeps coming back to throughout this document is if we're using these technologies, how are we? He uses the phrase interior freedom a few times. It actually stuck out to me since it's such an Ignatian phrase. In the document. And so I think that there, how do we discern how to use this in a more loving way? And I think that you know, there's this entire section that it's like one of my favorite sections, like around 118. It's all on limits. And, you know, I think I wrote a reflection on this document and talked about the creation stories, right? The creation stories are like basically not the creation stories, Adam and Eve in the garden, right? When you look back at that, it's really a story about limits and how humans don't like limits, right? We have access to everything that we need in the garden. And what do we take? We take the one thing that we're asked not to take, right? Because, well, it looks good, right? It's not because Eve is trying to sin. When the serpent asks her, she goes, well, it looks delicious to eat and it would be nice to be wise, right? And so I think that that's what's happening with this technology is like, well, this is great. It can make me faster at my job, or we can, you know, we can optimize things so that humans aren't forced to do these menial tasks. But the issue is that our social systems are not set up to support that, right? So when we take away those tasks, it's not giving people time to do deeper work, or it's not giving people access to jobs that will give them a living wage or a living income. And so it's like, I think the big question is to what end? Are we doing this, and to whose benefit? And I think at this point there are like 5 men in Silicon Valley that have like the most control over these systems, and making these decisions, just like with social media that happened. And so I just, yeah, that I think that's like the big question in this is like how much is enough and to what end and to whose benefit. And I think at the beginning of the document, Pope Leo goes over the history of Catholic social teaching to remind Catholics and people, of goodwill who are reading this document, like that the whole goal is about justice and charity and love, and flourishing of people and the planet. And that I just don't believe that that's what they're talking about in like the chat GPT boardroom. That's not I don't know that that's the measure or the standard that they're using to think about, yeah, when we're unleashing these things into the world.
I think this goes back to just how fast things are being developed, that the reason it's going that fast is because these conversations are not being had. I definitely see them on the research side of things. We're often focused, or been seeing an increasing focus of human computer interaction and human robot interaction research, focusing on community based practices, but I'm not seeing that as much on like the development side of things.
It's funny that you say that. The specific in this is gonna seem like a stretch, but I swear it's not. The specific passage that I was going back over my notes, and the thing that comes up is the very end of the document. The conversations that we're not having. So in at the very end of the document, specifically like paragraph 230, Pope Leo says, our world is filled with attempts to seize control of markets and spheres of influence, often shrouded in reassuring rhetoric and seductive ideologies. Yet our hearts yearn for an approach that is wise and benevolent, akin to that which Mary praises in her Magnificat, when she proclaims God's mercy extends in every generation for those who fear him. This plan of mercy continues to unfold throughout history today, even amid the rapid and unsettling changes brought by algorithms and global networks, and it becomes a compass in the digital era for living our lives according to the gospel. And just that idea of the Magnificat, right? Like that Mary is praising. I mean, it's such a specific moment in the Gospels where Mary is pregnant, she's with her cousin, and the thing that leaps out of her is this praise to God, right? And specifically I'm looking at like a poster that I have on my wall where Mary says that God will cast down the mighty, fill the hungry, lift the lowly, send the rich away. Those, in a way, those are the conversations that we're like, this idea of how are we using these technologies in a way that uplifts and adds to the experience of everyday people in a meaningful way, right? Earlier, I think it's chapter 4 when Pope Leo kind of gets into these are the 3 challenges that AI presents, right? Emerging digital technologies present. And one of them is the economic, the socioeconomic, and one of them is this epistemological, like what is truth, and then the other is trying to remember, but like how are we bridging that gap between like how do we purposely slow down the development of AI, not because we don't think it's valuable, but rather so that when we are developing and implementing it and handling these technologies, we're doing them in a way that like really uplifts the purpose of them, right? I think it's so funny that we have something that yes can detect cancer early and can help with making our lives easier and better, and instead we are forced to use it to make images of presidents pooping on protesters, and we're
I'm glad
using
that
it.
that's the AI thing that we've really latched on to, I'm glad that that's like, yeah, that's good.
Or yeah, I mean the other cultural thing that I think Pope Leo gets to often in this document is this idea that like all of these technologies, and not just AI, but like a lot of modern digital life means that we are getting, and when he talks about it, he often quotes Laudato Si, Pope Francis's document, that that we are living in a world where we feel more and more isolated from each other. That's what I mean, the Marxist idea of disenfranchisement, not just from your labor, but also from each other. Like the we're being forced to live a life in which we are lonelier and lonelier, and technologies are not bringing us together, but driving that loneliness. Um, and yeah, I think that there's a lot there, and like the fact that this conversation is happening, I think gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah. Well, it's like he talks about the civilization of love right at the end of the document, and like how are we building that at a time of increasing kind of polarization or a lack of being in communion with other people. My favorite quote from this entire document is 220. And in it, is it 220? Yes, it's 220. It's like talking about the importance of dialogue in the context of war, but reviving dialogue. Um, it involves acquiring an attitude that seeks to forge bonds of fraternity built on listening and open demeanor, making time for each other, and even wasting time together. And that phrase, wasting time together, feels really important to me. So, like, even if nobody watches this live stream, like, just the fact that we are spending an evening together. Ideally, it would be better if we were all in the same state, in the same place, and we could have had, a little food together, right? But I think that that is we are I am obsessed with how many times he kind of trashes the idea of efficiency in this document. He mentions it at least 16 times, of just like our obsession with being more efficient. And again, and maybe this is just me because I'm not a particularly efficient person, I do think we need to be more efficient in like finding cancer cells, right? But for the average one of us who was like relatively safe during the pandemic and wasn't being forced to go out and work and was like starting a sourdough starter, like when we have more time, like we don't like we could be as efficient as we want, right? But like we don't really know what to do with that, I think, in these days, right? Like there was a time when there was deep sense of community, like neighborhood by neighborhood, and we had to be isolated during that time, but it felt like, oh, we've become these individualized projects, and like I'm going to use my COVID time to like, whatever, learn a thing. And that's fine, but I really think that we've like this idea of the civilization of love is that it's not an individual project, that we like, that call back to Laudate Deum that Leo uses in this, like no one is saved alone. And so we are in this interconnected world, we're in this interconnected digital world, and so how are we responding to the people around us, right? Because that section ends with, for if we experience authentic encounters with others, with those who are different, strangers and migrants, it becomes much more difficult even to imagine war. And I think at a time when like war is reemerging and we have these technologies that are making it easier to drop bombs on one another, like I think the only solution is to, as you were saying, Alexa, to slow down and to like, I don't know, like go offline and touch grass. Like again, we need like the cancer fighting AI, but I think like we are collectively, at least I'll say in the United States, like mentally ill from how much we are like on our devices. And we've seen like these examples of like AI psychosis. Like it breaks my heart to think that someone is going to type into a chat bot instead of being able to like pick up the phone and call someone or even text someone. And so I think like this whole image of the civilization of love kind of compared to that Tower of Babel, like we could even do that individually in our own lives. Like how am I trying to like optimize myself or my life or even my learning? When we think about students, that whole section about like learning actually takes time and struggle, and that's how you learn. And if you can just put into a chat bot, like write an essay about, I don't know, like iambic pentameter in Romeo and Juliet. I don't even know if that's what that uses, right? Like then what are we even doing? Like what I think that's like my takeaway is like Pope Leo is like, we're humans, we're here, this is amazing. and like, what are we going to do with this time that we have? We can use it to kind of build these monuments to ourselves, or we can use it for mutual flourishing. So I think that that was just such a beautiful way to end the document, and to end with the Magnificat, which is that vision of the civilization of love and of shared thriving. Yeah, was the perfect way to end it in my mind.
Agreed. Shoot. Well, to say one unrelated thing that tangentially related,
Great.
but I think that I do think that that's what we're having now. This conversation that we are having now, I think, is valuable, right? Like you said, even if we're talking into a vacuum, that's fine. In so many ways, this is my connection. Dorothy Day is cited in the document in paragraph 124. Pope Leo talks about people who throughout history have uplifted the human dignity of people and have taken that seriously, right? And he talks about the civil rights movement. He talks about Nelson Mandela and apartheid South Africa. And then he mentions Dorothy Day among a number of women. And I think what we're doing to connect it to the Catholic worker, right, the movement associated with Dorothy Day and Peter Marin often talks about this idea of clarification of thought. And Catholic workers take seriously, to some extent, this idea of having conversations in which you're like clarifying your thought. I feel like just the conversation that we're having now has been that for me, right? Like I came in with a bias, and I think we're obviously, I think we're all kind of in agreement, but still I think that hopefully this is helpful to somebody, and if not, it was at least helpful to me in like clarifying our thought around this conversation around AI and this encyclical and what it means. And like I feel like we could have like 8 more live streams just about this document where we're going in
Comment
depth.
down below and we'll do 8 more live streams.
Comment down below. But like I think that that's valuable, and I think that is like it's helpful to have these conversations, and the fact that we're talking about it at all means that hopefully there is movement for some sort of change in our world.
Mm-hmm.
I think that I really find that that's the hope. That is the Magnificat. The fact that we are participating in this image, in this my other side comment is it's fascinating how often like a construction site is the image that is associated in my mind with the way in which Pope Leo frames this whole thing. And he even talks about like construction sites at the very end. Like this is the construction site of, the construction site of our time is literally the name of that section, right? From 236 to near the end, right before he gets into the Magnificat. Yeah, I find that valuable, and I hope that in having these conversations we can begin to build that city and not build halt the construction of another Tower of Babel. Yeah, any other thoughts? I have like one more thing that I feel like we should talk about, but it feels like a last sort of thing. Or questions from each other?
I feel like I've been talking a lot. So Alexa, you got anything?
Yeah, I think I'm like with Jorge, where we're like we're pretty much in agreement of like how we're talking about most of these things. I think a lot of this goes to like how do we empower people to like keep and build these new like human connections. Brenna, like you were mentioning, like right now it's hard. Like sometimes people will prefer to type in like ChatGPT versus like reach out to someone. Like how do we like strengthen those types of connections? I think another part of that empowerment comes from like the education side, which I really appreciated that there's a section on how do we kind of talk about this education? How do we build like that critical thinking to like analyze these things like these emerging technologies, in a way that is critical, that we're really thinking about not only of like how might it be useful, but like how is it actually being harmful, who is being a part of these conversations in the first place. um, yeah, I'm not, that's not necessarily adding anything new. Whenever you were first talking, Brenda, I was one of the, I think, highlights that I definitely did a different color than some of the other stuff was like in the introduction, in 15, where it's like true progress always stems from an open heart to others, an intelligence willing to listen, and a will that seeks what unites rather than what separates. So it's like
Mm,
just going back to that connection. How do we build it? How do we empower people?
yeah. Yeah, I would suggest for anyone who was planning on typing into ChatGPT, I'm going to put Jorge's phone number in the chat. He's a great listener. So anytime you feel like that's the start of the civilization of love. You just call Jorge any hour of the day and he'll listen to you.
Uh, Thanks for that,
Luckily, I don't
Brenna.
have access to the chat on my cell phone, so can't do that. But
Wow, you really made me laugh, and I just was not expecting that. Um, okay, what is the okay, Brenna? You shared your favorite quote from this document. I want to share mine, which comes much earlier. People that are following me on Instagram or TikTok or whatever the heck else I use, I don't even know that this is definitely my favorite quote. And it's funny because it quotes another document. It quotes Laudato Deum, which was Pope
mm,
Francis's the last time that we had a stream was about this document. So um yeah, the quote is from paragraph 73, talking about
mhm,
solidarity. Um
yeah.
where this is the quote so about halfway through, he says fraternity is not merely an aspiration of believers, but it is a social and political reality to be embodied in communal choices and endeavors. Solidarity, then, is the concrete recognition that the future of each individual is connected to the future of all. Indeed, the quote, no one is saved alone. And that's so striking. And I think the rest of the paragraph is great because it connects it back to like the meaning of solidarity in hand with subsidiarity. Subsidiarity, I think, is like the most overlooked aspect of Catholic social teaching. I think that like if everyone understood subsidiarity better, we would live in a better world. But that's probably true about all sorts of things. Um, but just this idea, and then at the very end of it is literally he says, the interconnectedness also pertains to this responsibility of authentic participation. Solidarity is expressed when each person, both individually and collectively, takes part in the life of the community by staying informed, engaging with others, making their voice heard, and contributing to public decisions and choices, while also assuming real responsibility so that the common good is achieved through shared decision making. Like
Mm,
we need each other. Just like the my favorite Hezekiah Walker song, I need you to
mm,
survive. Like we need one another. Um it- and like the way in which we survive is together. Like at the end of the day, this technology would not be possible, right? Like the fact that people are getting rich off of it means that somebody is being exploited. We literally need each other in order for the technology to work, right?
mhm,
And am my life, I'm not off the grid. I'm not totally subsistent on my own. If nothing else, I need the earth and the resources that are on this earth. But like I would not have survived past infant what the being an infant
infancy. Mhm.
infancy. In that moment I couldn't have gotten that word out if not for you, Brenna. But like, a baby doesn't survive on their own without the hands of many, many people, right? Keeping them alive, literally, because we're not even capable of doing that after birth. Um, like we need each other, and the that's the reality. And so once we begin to become aware of that reality, our empathy and our capacity to reason in our communities becomes significantly better, more robust. So I'm just really heartened by the idea that, like, at the end of the day, if we are not doing this together, like, we will not accomplish anything. Literally, no one is saved alone. There's an African proverb: "He who helps his brother's boat across will also reach the shore." And I think that perfectly describes the situation that we're in. If we are able to get there together, we get there together. Or we don't get there at all.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah,
long-winded.
there's no, but well, it's funny because Jorge talked about this in a staff meeting and like really loved that paragraph, and he read that first part and then he went back and read the top, and then by the end we had the whole paragraph, and it was really sweet. I mean, I think that like that's the work of integral ecology. Like that just basically means that everything's interconnected, and I think that this is a document of integral ecology. It's talking about labor rights, it's talking about modern day slavery, it's talking about how the earth is being impacted by this issue, and how we need like rare earth metals, and like who are the people who are being forced oftentimes for no or little pay to do that hard labor so that we can have cell phones that like function so seamlessly, and the three of us can be talking to each other from three separate states. So I think that like when I hear the end of that paragraph 73 about when we are informed and engaged and make our voices heard. Like I just wrote, may it be so next to it, because we need societies that sustain people. So I'm like all on board if like AI can like make it so that people don't have to work these like labor intensive crushing jobs, and that we can have work with dignity and that gives people free time to engage in their community. May it be so. My fear is that AI will be used to further enrich those people who are already rich, and further exploit people who have already been exploited, and not allow us to use that efficiency, right, to give people the space to engage in their community. So, but the last thing I will say that's like more positive is something I've been thinking about, not a proverb, but is just in ecological work. There are these areas called like edge zones. And basically it's where two different ecosystems meet each other. So you can think like a field and a forest. And those places are like the most biodiverse places, right? Because we've got the forest creatures, we've got the field creatures, and then we've got these unique creatures that can only survive in the intermixing between the two. And so I think that we have to think about those like edge zones in our own work between these issues, and also just thinking about like how much richer our society is when everyone's voices can be heard, when there's space. Or like you were saying, Alexa, something that I really appreciated. I think that you can't say DEI, but nobody's sponsoring this, right? I think that this encyclical is also talking a lot about diversity and equity and inclusion, right? And so there's a lot of bias in these AI models, right? And things like that. And so it's like who's making the models and in whose image, right? And when we think about that. So I think that there is great opportunity to promote diversity, to take advantage of all of the skills that people have in the service of flourishing. And so my final thought is, may it be so. I'm a little cynical, and so I mean, I'm not cynical, I think it's possible, but like it's not going to happen naturally. Like as always, we're going to have to fight and demand and push for justice to be the end goal at the end of the day. But I do believe solidarity is possible, and we've seen so many examples of it from communities around the world. So may it be so.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, right. I think you hit the nail on the head. The way that you describe this document as a document of integral ecology, I think honestly the way that I was reading this document was as a document of cultural work, right? This is a document that's very explicit about the rights of laborers, the rights of labor, the dignity of human beings, the dignity of work. and the reality that like AI and emerging digital technologies, TM, has become a force that we have to reckon with when we think about culture and we think about work and we think about people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and and so I, when this document ends, chapter 245, last chapter, he he gives us this sort of mission, right? With the same faith as Mary, talking about the Magnificat. Let us become weavers of hope in the world. Weavers of hope. Weaving is one of the oldest forms of labor. Um, it is what defines culture, right? Like working together, making clothes, people who share who we are and what we have, so that the presence, and then he says the presence of Jesus may grow among us and his kingdom take shape. In the humble fidelity of daily life, even the era of AI can become a time in which the Holy Spirit brings about the civilization of love in our lives. Um, how wonderful, how progressive and hopeful a thought. I think that there's a lot of challenges, there's a lot of roadblocks. We could do a SWOT analysis of the if we did a SWOT analysis of AI between the three of us, I think it would be mostly obstacles and threats. But there's that hope that I think is needed in order to continue to proceed. Um, okay, the
Sorry,
if
one last thing. Sorry, this is very dorky, Jorge, but like hearing you say that part, like the even the an era of AI can become a time in which the Spirit brings the civilization of love, really reminds me of the principle and foundation of Saint Ignatius, right? Like where he says,
mm,
like basically like this idea of Ignatian indifference, right? Like neither wealth nor poverty, neither health nor sickness, right? Like anything can bring us closer to God and to be more loving people. So just hearing you say that, like, yeah, unlocked that in my brain. And so that's, yeah, a good reminder of,
totally. Well, I mean
yeah.
that's Michael J. Himes, right? That's the sacramental vision. That's the idea that everything in existence has the potential, is imbued with this grace, and so it is our job to find that grace in everything that exists. Um, or to
Even,
allow to be indifferent, so that all these things, I mean, as Ignatius put it, to bring us closer to the mission that we are created for,
yeah,
which, Iggy and I have slightly different interpretations of, but to glorify, praise, and worship God, uh or whatever.
or whatever. Nice.
Alexa, any last thoughts?
I don't know. I really appreciate being here with the both of you because you both have very poetic ways of thinking and interpreting this. Because I've been in academia for so long, like the way when I was reading this document, I was thinking of like, okay, what are these trade-offs? What are these different reflective questions? What does this mean for research? How do I tie
Mhm.
this back in the motivation for why we need digital literacy? And that was kind of my approach. Whereas like some of the discussions you all have been bringing up is really nice. I would also like kind of thinking still in the academic sense of like, okay, what are the like implications of all this? What are the action items that follow up? And like Jorge brought up the last paragraph where it was talking about weaving. So one of like my immediate takeaways is like, okay, how do we find ways of like we kind of brought this up a little bit of like having more of these chats, but my immediate thought is like, how do we find ways of bring more of our human art into these types of discussions to
Mhm.
lead to some of that flourishing, or even thinking about like in the development of these types of things, how do we have these types of conversations to slow down that development, to empower people in thinking about the social implications of these types of technologies. Um, and then this kind of led me down a train of thought of a shameless plug. I'm on the board for this nonprofit called the All Tomorrows Institute, where part of the mission is like, how do we use storytelling to talk about the realistic impacts that AI technologies can have on people, like trying to get a sense of like the different voices that are often not heard. So like from young adults. How are their experiences being affected by AI? How are they imagining the futures of these technologies? How do we get away from like these stories of like AI hype that we get a lot from these big companies, but also away from like immediate horror of like this is a bad technology. Like how do we get that in between of all these stories? Um, that was multiple things in one, but those were my final thoughts.
Great. And thanks, Alexa, because I love talking poetically with Jorge, and there are very few people on this planet Earth who will want to watch a 1 hour and 25-minute conversation of us speaking poetically to each other. So we need people to create toolkits and just like very practical questions that like people can wrestle with in their own lives. So thanks for
Yeah.
that skill set.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I mean, I've had plenty of conversations with Jorge where I'm like, he knows how to frame this all beautifully, where I'm sometimes a little bit too logical about things.
But it takes all types because sometimes I'm speaking poetically and someone is like very logically minded and we're just like missing each other. So, yeah, that's the beauty of the way our brains work.
Well,
And AI doesn't have a brain. Ours are all different. It's one, it's kind of like one Tower of Babel, right? Because it's just like the consolidation of like all of that information versus like those, how if we parsed it back out, right, to all of this unique human creativity. So, yeah.
well said. Well said, you all. Well, I think the thing that we need to end the stream on, I think I mentioned this near the beginning, but there's been this really interesting pop culture response to this encyclical. Again, most people did not read the 245 paragraphs. That's fine. That's
I didn't.
normal. But I think the message that people are getting is this idea of like Pope Leo is declaring a holy war on AI, and from our conversation, that's clearly not the case. But I do think it's funny. So I just want to share with you all a couple of things that I've found that I think are valuable. Share screen is easiest with 2 monitors. Cool.
Cool.
Yes. Okay. Window. Here we go. Can you all see? Here we go. Yes.
Yeah,
the
great.
wonderful tabs. So there's this company called Good Shirts, thegoodshirts.com. They're not sponsoring us, but I wish they were, because they make some of the funniest things that I've ever seen. Some of them are so inappropriate, and so for that reason, I'm glad that ISN has not sponsored this stream. But like, they made this shirt. The Knicks made the finals on the day that the Pope declared a holy war on AI, Monday, May 25th, 2026. Incredible shirt. Beautiful shirt. So specific in time. And then there's this shirt. Papal Bulls on parade. I mean, again, it wasn't a papal bull. I like the Rage Against the Machine reference. Whatever. I think it's funny. And then there's the last one. No, it's a good Butlerian jihad. I just didn't expect it to be Catholic. This, of course, Butlerian jihad is a reference to the book series and now movie series Dune, where in the lore of that universe, sentient robots rose up against humanity, and humans had to fight a literally centuries-long war against robots, and then they won, and then they decided no more thinking machines. And that is what is called the Butlerian Jihad, is this like holy war against robots. And so it's funny that everyone is like, oh, the Pope wrote an encyclical on AI. Clearly, he's saying all AI is evil.
That's funny. It just took me a minute. I read Dune. Is this at the beginning or is this later on?
This is like the context for Dune. Like, they reference the Butlerian Jihad, but like it doesn't happen in the course of the books. This is so nerdy. it doesn't happen in the course of the book. It happens like centuries in the past.
Got it. Okay, I missed that. Cool. All right. Thanks.
It's
I'm
like one of
caught up.
those. I think it's in the appendices of the book where they like talk about the history or whatever. Yeah, Herbert Frank, interesting guy.
I just
Yeah,
love your sense of humor, Jorge. It's very niche, and that is what makes you like particularly uniquely you.
thank you. I'll take that as a compliment.
It is. It is.
Well, I'm grateful for you all for bearing through that. Yeah, whatever that was, the last 3 minutes of that conversation.
I just
Thank
don't have
you.
enough pop culture in me to, be hip enough to laugh real. It's because you're cool and you're hip.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I'm not gonna say anything about that. I appreciate you all for the willingness to jump on this live stream to talk about these things. And I appreciate everyone that tuned in for whatever part of this that you tuned in for. We've now hit the 90-minute mark. And I think now is probably a good time to call it.
Yeah, I agree. Goodbye, Tina Marie. I'm sure you stayed here for the whole 90 minutes. So thank you for that. And it was wonderful to be with you, magnificent humans.
Yes, it was great.
Do we have anything? Do you guys have anything to plug?
I've heard about these college kids these days are having Luddite clubs where they get together and don't use technology. I know that's not the takeaway from this document, but I do think it's good for people who are online a lot to like get offline and just like do some knitting or drawing or sketching or just letting our minds wander instead of constantly being fed content. So, non TM, I don't run one of those, but I think it's a cool idea. So that's
Alexa,
what I'm
anything to plug?
plugging.
I haven't seen clubs, but I've seen trends of people trying to do an hour of just boredom without other things going on, which seems painful. You could just make art instead of just not
Being
doing
bored.
anything. But
Mhm.
I mean, I guess I already plugged this. All Tomorrow's Institute, alltomorrows.org is a nonprofit that I think is going to do some cool stuff. They're starting to do some cool stuff. At some point, a dear friend Rena was doing like a week in robotics social media type stuff, which was nice. But I think some of the stuff is focusing on some podcasting just to focus on like these different narratives about AI, and also some other research incentives to get a full sense of the different scope. Because these technologies are cool, they just need to be done slowly, and we need to think critically about them.
Heck yeah.
Do you
I
have
don't really have
anything to
any.
plug?
Anyone that's on here is like following me on social media where I don't make anything of any real value, but sometimes I make a joke and that's valuable in its own way.
I think you need to make your own t-shirts on that one site with a more accurate scope of what the Pope was saying. So it was not a holy war, but it was, I don't know, funny blurb.
Yeah, what would we call it? What would you compare it to?
I have had an idea for a shirt company where I think I could speak about this in the safety of the like 4 people probably watching this live. Um and I've brought this up to my boss, so it's fine. ISN makes a lot of really good merch. I think that I Brenna, you mentioned my sense of humor. I have a weird sense of humor, and I think that some people would appreciate things that were very, very niche. That like
Hmm.
I what I appreciate about the things that we make at ISN is the shirt blanks that we use are all ethically made, and like also some of the softest t-shirts I've ever worn in my life. Like they're such good shirts, and I don't always want to wear something with like a Pedro Rupe quote on it in public, but I would love to wear something with like a really niche joke that like 4 people would get and be like, "Oh, that's funny." Something about the post document being a little bit less radical than expecting us to go to a holy war would be funny, but I don't know what the joke there would be. But I do think that if you find that idea interesting, you should send me money, and then I will start on making a company that does that. I don't know. I've had this idea for a while. I would love to make things that people would wear that are also like specific, and if people would wear them, that's great. And probably we would keep like no proceeds. Um, doing it for the love of the game and donating the money to probably the place where Brenna and I work.
That's not sponsoring this.
That's not sponsoring this.
Yeah,
But you will
not
sponsor
sponsored.
them.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm sure Adidas will hit you up after this. They're probably
Yeah.
going to want to sign an exclusive contract.
You know, I would take it if we could have some conversations about sourcing with Adidas.
Sure. That's
Yeah.
great.
Well, with all that being said, thank you all so much. It was so lovely to be with you all. Thank you for people in this in the chat. Specifically the Instagram chat was the one that was like really blowing up. Thank you all. Love you all very, very much. Goodbye.
Hi.